Welcome back to the Code Ryan podcast. Today I have on Nishant to talk about Next.js. But before we kind of get into some interesting parts of Next.js, Nishant, could you give me kind of a little bit of a background on yourself just to give a bit more context for this conversation?
So I am a front-end engineer or maybe senior. I got promoted this month in a company called Doodle Innovations. It's in Chennai. Chennai, India. I and my the like I am working remotely from in my job. Apart from that, I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about front-end development, software, how to make this, that, like all the concepts. Then I also write blogs on Free Code Camp, and a few of my videos have been published there. For example, the recent video was how to make a clone of LinkedIn using React and Firebase. So that's it. And apart from that, I am also a writer, and I am writing a novel, like a fictional novel.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, kind of with that, I think that gives a good kind of background on yourself and kind of what you're up to these days. But now to kind of transition into today's topic of discussion here, which is Next.js. As on your YouTube channel, you also have several videos on Next.js and kind of go over kind of how it works and some really nice tutorials there. So I think a good place for us to start. I haven't had much experience personally with Next.js. I've watched some videos on it and kind of have a general understanding, and I haven't posted much content regarding it or had kind of podcast interviews about Next.js at this point. So I think a good place for us to start is just like, what is Next.js for someone that might not be too familiar with it?
Basically, Next.js is React from base point of view, but with some other things. So for example, in React, we have React router that is used for routing from one page to another, because React is a single page application because we don't have A tags or href links in React. So if we want to move from one page to another, or if you want to implement them, we can use React router, which is external library made for React, only for React. But in Next.js, we don't have to install some other library like external library. The router is already part of Next, which is called Next router. So it's easy to use and integrate. And yes.
Cool. And why would someone decide to use Next.js compared to just using something like Create React App? Like what would you say are some of the benefits of going with something like Next.js?
So there is a lot of benefits. For example, Next.js is a full stack framework. So for example, let's say we want to create an application like a full stack app using React, but that's not possible because we don't have the options to make API endpoints there. We have to use Node.js, and that will become MERN stack then, like MongoDB, React, Node, and Express. But in Next.js, we can do it on the server. Like we have a folder called API. In that folder, we can create our endpoints that we can call on the client side of not the client, the UI side of the Next.js, which is pages folder.
Gotcha. So in Next.js, you can kind of have a built-in API within a Next.js application and kind of create more of a full stack application rather than with something with Create React App, to where you might need to kind of spin up like an Express server or something like that to kind of have that full stack capabilities. Does that sound like kind of the benefit you're referring to here?
Yes, that's correct. Also, in Next.js, we have SSR, which is known as server-side rendering. That means the code, if we write it, that will not be generated on the browser. It will come from the server side, which is the local machine. So in case of React, we have CSR, not SSR, which is called client-side rendering. So let's say we create a React app, and if you check the source code, we will only see one tag div with the ID of root. So from that ID, we are loading JavaScript and all the HTML UI components and CSS. But in Next.js, the code is generated in the backend. Sorry, not backend, in the server side. So the entire code is pushed as a document to the browser, and then the browser loads it on their. Yes, the browser loads it there. So it's useful when we want to create websites like, let's say, with great SEO, search engine optimization. For example, let's say we have a blog website where we have the blog for what is CSR or SSR in Next.js. Let's say there's a person A, he searches that topic on Google. If the app which is made, if the app is made in React, he might not find that properly on Google. The link of the blog. But the same blog, if it is made in Next.js, he might find it because of SEO. So because the entire code gets loaded and it has keywords. So if you search for correct keywords, it will load up.
Gotcha. So my understanding of that benefit is that SEO, search engine optimization, it's basically how they kind of scrape the web to look for these different keywords and stuff. And then with Next.js, since you kind of render your web page on the server and then send that web page when you kind of go to a URL or go to a certain route, the web scraper will have all of those keywords and all that information to kind of improve the search engine optimization. So when someone searches something, your page might be more likely to come up compared to something like with Create React App or rendering everything on the front end. You kind of render on the fly, you render it on the go. So that web scraper doesn't really have all that data yet to kind of improve that search engine optimization. Does it sound like I'm kind of understanding that correctly?
So, okay, I can take one example, a real life example for this. So this example has happened with me a few days ago. So I was traveling to a place. There's a place in India called Goa. So it is it's a tourist place. So what happened is my flight was late. I traveled from my city to one more city, which is called Mumbai. From there, I had flight to Goa. So the thing is, I didn't web check. I hadn't web checked in. So it caused me some problems. So my point is, if I had checked in with web or online, so I may not have the problems that I had there on the Goa airport. So similarly, the Next.js app generates the HTML, CSS in advance so that it might not have a problem on loading the application.
Gotcha. So it not only has those SEO benefits, but it also has performance benefits of, since it renders everything kind of on the server side and then sends it across, it can potentially improve performance. Is that correct?
Yes, that is also correct. Performance is also improved in Next.js.
Gotcha. So to me, it sounds like some of the core benefits of Next.js compared to something like Create React App are that, for one, in Next.js, you can kind of also have an API and like a full stack application rather than just kind of the UI portion. And then also can improve your search engine optimization. And then also with kind of your server side rendering, it can improve performance in certain situations. Do those kind of sound like some of the main features and benefits that Next.js offers compared to something like Create React App?
Yes, they are the features, but there is more. For example, in React, in Create React App, we had a compiler which is called Webpack. So the same compiler was used before Next.js 12, version. But from Next.js 13, we have a new compiler called TurboPack. So it increases the performance even more. So if you load application using Webpack, it takes around 3.5 seconds. But if you use TurboPack, it will take around 1.4 seconds.
Gotcha. So Next.js also has this kind of improved compiler that can create a build much more quickly than something like Webpack and Create React App.
Yes, in 13th version, Next.js 13. the latest version.
Cool. Well, I think that gives a really good overview on some of the main kind of features and benefits that Next.js has to offer compared to something like Create React App. But maybe just to dive in a little bit further on kind of the rendering that Create React App has compared to Next.js. So a couple things that you mentioned with Next.js is it has server-side rendering, and then I know in your videos you also mentioned kind of like pre-rendering and different things like that as well. And you kind of make a comparison to how Create React App, they're just kind of rendering things on the go. There's not really this pre-rendering and server-side rendering. Could you maybe explain a little bit the different kind of rendering styles of something like Create React App compared to Next.js?
So in the Create React app, we have CSR, client-side rendering. So what happens is in CSR, there is a user, like say you or me. We opened a browser and typed something like a link to a web app. So what will happen is we will send a request to the page like a app, yes, that will send the request to server to then that request will send us back the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And all these things will be done in the browser itself. In React, I'm talking about. So the server sends us the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript back to the browser, and then it's served to us. It is called CSR, client-side rendering. And in Next.js, we have a topic called, not in Next.js is a topic called pre-rendering, which means the entire code will be generated beforehand in advance. So it has two types. First is server-side rendering, and second is static generation. So in server-side rendering, mainly it is used for apps like which is dynamic. For example, let's say a blog website or a social media website or like an e-commerce website where we have different users and the data is changing or maybe different products. But the second type is static site generation. Let's say a simple website where the data is not changing frequently. We have a page which shows same kind of data to different users, whether it be you or me.
Gotcha. So Next.js kind of allows you to decide how you want to render some of that content based on the kind of nature of your application. So if it's just like an application to where your content is static, so it's not like a bunch of dynamic things that are changing based on user input and stuff like that, you can do something in Next.js just called like static rendering and static generation and generate that content that is just going to be there. It's not really going to change. But you can also do like server side rendering, which might be a little bit more dynamic. Does that sound like a kind of fair summary there? Awesome. Cool. And kind of with that, I think that gives a good idea on kind of how they might handle these different styles of rendering. But one kind of interesting thing that I think so with Next.js is how it kind of handles routing. And to me, it seems like it does more of like a file-based routing system rather than needing to kind of import an external library like React Router DOM or something like that. So could you maybe give an overview on how someone might create different routes in their web page using a Next.js app?
So yes, it's like much simpler than a React app. So in Next.js, we have a folder called pages. So let's say we have a page called home.jsx or home.js or txx. So we have a folder called home in the pages folder. So we can try to go to /home, but it will not work because it treats like this. Next.js works like this. Whatever we have inside pages, the root should be index file. So we have an index. That means that is the root. If we move to if we create one more page called home, then we might have to do root, / then home. If we want to have nested routing, we have to do a folder. For example, we have in pages index, and then let's say profile page. So we have to do index page, then a folder called profile. In that profile folder, we will have index file. Then we can move to /home/profile.
My understanding is that it takes a more of a kind of file-based routing system to where you just automatically, when you create a certain file, it will create a route for that within the kind of pages folder. And if someone wants to like learn this a little bit better, definitely check out the Next.js docs, where you can kind of see examples of this and stuff like this. But I think the takeaway for this podcast is that Next.js, it has built-in routing in which it kind of, when you name a certain file, it might already just automatically create a certain route for that. And it might take you a second to kind of get the hang of when you're coming from a like React Router DOM system, but it is very like intuitive, and I think that it's pretty straightforward as well. And like you said, they also support kind of nested routing and stuff like that, just like different router systems when using Create React App. And within Next.js, can you also like do programmatic routing, in which I think in your video you mentioned that Next.js offers kind of a link component that will allow you to kind of programmatically link to different pages and kind of more dynamically route a user to different pages? Or how does that kind of work in Next.js?
So it's same as React. I mean, in React Router, we have a link from React DOM. So in the same way, we have link from next link in Next.js. So just we have to wrap, let's say we have a tag or a p tag, which has some data called or text called home or profile. We have to wrap that element in link from next link, and then add to, and then the route. So if it is home, we can add /home, or if it is profile, we can add /profile. Simple as that.
And earlier you mentioned that Next.js is also an API. Could you maybe give a high level overview of how that kind of API works in Next.js? Like, does it kind of give you an out of the box folder where you create your API, or how does that kind of work?
Yes, we do have a folder for APIs. So yes, we have a folder, and in that folder, we can write our endpoints. And yes, so for example, we want to write some functions to get all the data from the server or from some MongoDB document. So we can write the endpoint. Let's say we have a file called API. In that file, in that folder, let's make a file called get all data or get all users. So in that file, we can define a function and export it. In that function, we can write simply the source of the data that we want to send to the user in the front end, and then send the response and all. Just like we do in Node.js. Node.js. So let's say the file name is called get all users in API folder. So to access it, we can use /API, the folder name, /get all users in the client side or in the front end using fetch API.
Gotcha. So within the API folder, you can create different routes and stuff like that to kind of handle different requests all within your kind of overall Next.js application. And you don't need to create like a, separate backend to do this. You can handle all of this within Next.js. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha. And I know Next.js also has like different things to handle, like static content and stuff like that, like get static props and get static paths and stuff like that. But that's a little bit more technical than I was hoping to go here. So just know that there's different things that you can do within those API routes that can allow you to kind of handle this static generation and stuff like that, that can be super, super helpful. So I think a good place for us to go from here is an overview of how you like to style your Next.js applications. Is it similar to like Create React App, to where Next.js doesn't really have much of a preference on styles, or is there like a certain way that you're supposed to style your apps within a Next.js app?
So in Next.js, we don't have like regular styling that we have in React. It is a little bit different. So we have to use modules. For example, Let's say we have a folder called styles in Next.js. In that folder, we have a file called home.css or SCSS. If we try to import that in Next.js, it will not work. But the same, we have to rename that file home to home.module.css or SCSS. Then we have to import that file into our component using import styles from that route. Then we have to use styles.class name to activate the class on a tag or on an element.
Gotcha. So Next.js, it uses more of by default, a CSS modules style of styling its applications, in which you'll create that file and then you have to kind of import it within the certain file itself. Are there any other ways that you like to style your Next.js apps, or is it mostly just using that CSS modules as kind of a standard way to do it for yourself?
We can also use tailwind CSS, because it's a framework, but I have not much used styling in a Next.js application. I prefer only using modules.
Gotcha. So your preference is modules, but there are other things that you can use like Tailwind, or could you even use like styled components or different things like that within Next.js?
Yes, we can use Tailwind, style components, Chakra UI, all these things.
Cool. So kind of by default, it's easy to set up CSS modules in Next.js, but you can also kind of use other libraries if you'd like and different stuff like that. So it still kind of allows for that flexibility, it sounds like.
Yes, correct.
Awesome. Well, I think that gives a really good overview on Next.js and kind of how it works and what are some benefits from it. So I really appreciate you coming on here, Nishan. Is there anywhere people can go to kind of find you online if they want to stay up to date with some of the content that you're producing?
They can follow me on YouTube or maybe on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Nishant.
Yes, thank you for having me here.